We seem to have a common pattern in society right now where many people are kind of not feeling happy when it comes to doing their job. And in this video, I'm going to cover 15 signs that you might need to quit your job soon. And I'm trying to look out for your best interest here, so keep a track and I'll go through them at the end too, the 15 key points, and see if you're tallying up and 15 of those key signs that you need to quit your job are coming up in your life. Then maybe you need to consider quitting your job, finding your next opportunity, or taking a break from the workplace to find out what will work best for you next.
3 years since I left corporate, which feels like a lifetime ago. I'm not even kidding. It's felt like I've lived 17 lives between 2020 and 2024. And I don't know what that is, but I tell people all the time, when you leave corporate, the time, it feels like it doubles. At least that was the experience for me. It's the new year. People are contemplating on their life, what they've been doing, what's working, what's not working. And I'm just shocked at the amount of times I consistently hear how people hate their jobs, how they feel empty, how they feel a void. And it's been so long for me. I've literally had like 3 different career paths, 2 businesses in this time. I always feel like, oh, that was just me, that was my experience. But when I post about things on TikTok, when I tell my story, it feels like people are coming to me with this problem in the present day. And I know it's still happening, but like, it's just crazy that that's still happening, because that was something I had to like escape from. I literally felt like I had to jump out of it because I couldn't do it anymore, and it all happened at once. So it's not uncommon in this time period to start thinking about like, do I really want to do this for the rest of my life? Is this really for me? How come I can't seem to make this work? I think it's just your voice and your future self, honestly, just calling you towards what you're actually supposed to be doing. And
point number 1, don't ignore your instincts. If you're feeling uncomfortable at work, then there probably is a reason for that. And so many times in life we're told, oh, this is just the way it is. You have to participate in whatever system that could be. In this case, it'd be a 9-to-5 job that you might not be happy with. A corporate job we'll come on to in a bit more detail of the exact nature of a job in a few more clips here. But essentially, don't ignore your instincts. And if your instincts are telling you what you're doing is not right for you, rather than kind of ignore that continuously and then develop unhappy, negative coping mechanisms, unhealthy coping mechanisms, it's better to listen to your instincts and follow that rather than what you're told, what society tells you. And you can tell from the way many people are feeling in this society right now, they're not exactly happy with what they're doing. So there's no point following the crowd just for the sake of it. And I think you should run towards that feeling and figure out what the solution would be to that, like real solution, not just do what the normies tell you to do. And an interesting point here, she was mentioning around time kind of feeling different. She worked on several businesses for herself. She did some freelancing and things like that. And you feel like you're less on a hamster wheel when you are kind of self-employed. Time does move slower. You do have a bit more tracking what you're doing each day, what you're doing each week, because life's not going at this rapid pace of doing the same thing again and again. Of course, we will have the standard life habits, waking up, getting ready, getting on with your day job if you're working a corporate 9-to-5, or working on your side business, what that would be. But it does feel a bit less monotonous, and your life could move a step slower. You can still be productive, but when you're outside the kind of rat race, if you want to call it that, you can move a bit slower and actually have a kind of productive, more fulfilling life that way. So let's continue to listen to what she has to say here.
What companies to work at, and also being sold this dream that if you follow your passions, you are going to be financially unstable, unhappy, confused only, and that if you go towards corporate, you're going to have the financial stability, the health, the prosperity. And I don't think that's a reality for most people in corporate. Of course, not every job is perfect, but I don't even think 60 or 70% of people are thriving in corporate. I don't think there's a point to staying anywhere that you're not thriving or getting close to thriving, because this is your life. At the end of the day, it's your life. So I wanted to make this video because at the time when I was leaving my job or wanting to quit, I was so desperately looking for answers and looking for people who had done it before, because it felt so new and foreign to me. No one around me was doing it. It felt like I was the only person who needed to leave, who was losing their mental health, who was losing their just like sanity. And if you are feeling some kind of resistance, negativity, you feel yourself changing, your personality changing, your mental health, your physical health changing, and you are not enjoying what you're doing, you don't feel aligned, that is not a mistake. I don't think that's a coincidence or an accident. So I would just say, if you don't do anything else, listen to it and take one step towards that voice that's calling you towards something else, whether that's just one little video that you make, or sewing, or painting, or taking a day off, taking a PTO. Like, do something that is closer to the direction of the voice that's calling you, because you are in a space, speaking from experience, you are in a space where you're not processing information correctly because your brain is probably overloaded with stress and anxiety and fear and survival. You're basically not thinking clearly, and I wasn't thinking clearly, so I had to just leave. My next step was to just leave the environment with no job, no plan, to see what was next. And that space gave me the room to explore and play and figure out that I was in the wrong department, I was in the wrong industry, everything was wrong.
This is an important point, right? Firstly, I want to say you're sold a lot of lies and fear and anxiety by the system, which is kind of a trap. Anytime you're being coerced into something, maybe in a career path that you don't want to do, but you go to college or university and they keep telling you this is the right thing to do, this is the right thing to do, you have to pursue a particular career path, whatever that would be. I know people who, for example, two of them went in to learn actuary sciences, which is a bit like doing the kind of technical maths that are involved around insurance industry, and it can be a very high paying job. And one of them was super into maths, he liked the technical skills, and he didn't mind doing it, and he was happy to earn a high salary doing it. Another friend who just did it for the money, who was just studying it for the money, he couldn't keep up with it because he just found it incredibly boring, and it is very technical. It's like doing a bit like an accounting degree, things like that, but a lot more complex mathematics. So in the end, one of them ended up doing quite well for himself, and the other guy just kind of moved from pursuing a career path that would have led to working in the insurance industry to more focusing on academia and kind of doing a PhD in teaching at the university. So it's worthwhile thinking carefully of like what you're doing and why you're doing it. Is it because you're told it's going to be high paying? Is it because other people are telling you it's a safe career option? And now we can see there's no real safe career option to pick. Everything has a level of instability, and that's because the West in general, the world in general, is very unstable. So I wouldn't necessarily pick something based on the stability. I would pick a career path or entrepreneurship or whatever that would be. It's something that you're interested in and it does have a high earning potential, right? If you're just picking something for it to be safe or stable, that's really not the best option to do. You'll kind of get bored or unhappy, miserable and depressed doing it, and it's not going to be stable. So it's like all the compromises you made didn't really pay off in the end. And what she's talking about is people feeling fulfilled in their corporate careers. Many people aren't fulfilled. 60 to 70%, in my opinion, are kind of not feeling too happy working in the corporate industry, corporate environments, because they feel out of place. They might not be making the money they want to be making. They're desperately seeking, a promotion. They're looking for external validation and things like that. So I'm not saying it can't be made to be a productive, nice environment or people don't do well there. It's just there's a lot of kind of underlying brewing. The same way you see things come out with passive aggressive statements like one team, one dream life, things like that. You hear co-workers kind of make these slightly underhanded passive aggressive statements which reflect that their coping mechanism is dealing with a life they don't enjoy but they're kind of been trapped into. That's when you have phrases like happy Monday or happy Friday. And I'm not saying they're all said sarcastically, but there is a lot of underlying tone of I don't really want to be here, but I've got to be here to make money. I don't think you can live your life over the long term like that in most cases, unless it's maybe a short time period of your life where you're going to make a lot of money, save it, invest it 5, 10, 15 years, and then you can go and do your own thing or have a better work-life balance. So that's worthwhile taking into account. And I think who are incredibly happy to work in the corporate environment or kind of still under the illusion, I would say if 60 to 70% are seeing through the illusion and they're not necessarily that happy there's maybe 20 to 40% of people and they would be fulfilled being there. And I think there's two groups. It's not the people in the middle who would typically be people who've worked there for 3, 5, 10 years. They're not in a senior high paying role. They're not junior, so they're not naive. But the people who are happy would be the senior management who are getting paid a lot of money for not doing a lot of work, just kind of playing around with the office politics, delegating the real work to junior employees or middle management or people like that. And then the people who are also happy are the naive new joiners, people who just came out of college or university, they're working their first corporate job, maybe in a high power brand name company, Goldman Sachs, Google, things like that. And they're like, oh, I'm going to do so well here, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to make a good impression. And then over time, they become a bit more disillusioned which is a good example in her case here. And that kind of brings me on to my second point, the second sign that you need to quit your job ASAP. That would be if you're dealing with any kind of mental health issues that are coming up, neglecting the basics in life, whether it's your health, managing your personal relationships outside of work. If they start feeling neglected, your general mood is quite low daily, then that's probably a sign, a red flag that you shouldn't be in the job you're in, which takes up most of your time in your day. So if there's a major cause for your unhappiness, is probably what you're doing for the majority of your day, not some small little incident that occurred that maybe set you off and triggered you, is probably your day job. And the other thing is, it's important to take a step to resolve that issue. And a lot of times it could be simply pivoting at your current company for one particular job type to another, maybe a less stressful job or something that's more interesting and engaging for you, that matches your personality type. That's why it's important to kind of dig deep and find the deeper reason, rather than just say it's, you're dealing with a mental health issue. Why are so many people in society dealing with mental health issues? If it was one demographic or one group of people, we might say, oh, maybe there's something wrong with this group. They're not fitting in with everyone else. But there's so many people having some sort of mental health issue or discomfort being in society. There really is a broad, widespread issue that in many cases is linked to their finances or their career or some kind of deep economic, social trend that is impacting so many people.
I fell into this kind of like hustle culture, corporate is the way, it's the only way mindset. My university really fed that to me. I did a double major in supply chain and marketing. Marketing I added on later, even though marketing has always been the moment for me. I just was like, no, this is not a real job. People in marketing, they work grunt job and they take forever to get to like a good income. I'm never gonna make it. Like I had this mentality, this outdated mentality about that. So I added marketing as a side major, like second major, but my main one was supply chain, which I thought was boring. And if you don't know what that is, logistics, procurement, and all the behind the scenes of a lot of these big companies. Think Amazon. And that was not interesting to me. I think I chose it literally out of the notion of safety and stability. I thought it was lucrative. I ended up getting a job at a big telecommunications company in my city, and I interned there. I worked there for a year and a half, I think, full time. Total, I think it was like 2.5 years for my internship to when I left. And I thought this was the prize. I thought this was everything. This is where I was gonna make my mark until COVID hit. And I think all of the distractions about the job were no longer giving. We couldn't go into the office. There was no happy hours. There's no Starbucks runs. There was no pretending I'm this corporate Carrie Bradshaw. Like lots of calls. We had lost like a team member, so I picked up a lot of work. It wasn't just the work. It was a lot of what I was doing I did not enjoy. And this is where I realized I should not have been so try hard about everything. I think as a perfectionist and someone who likes to perform and do well and achieve, I was basically girl bossing way too close to the sun. I interviewed, I studied really hard for this role and for this position as an analyst or consultant that I didn't even really want. I was just working towards someone else's goal. It wasn't even mine, but I think I convinced myself that it was. Society, people around me, this was the norm, this was popular, especially in business school, they really push it down our throats. Like, if you land a job at a company, you're set for life. There's nothing else you need to do. The entire time, even before COVID, I always had this high level anxiety when I went into the office. My body was always like in chills or shaking. I'm naturally a cold person, but my body was always tense. I was so nervous to talk to everybody. I wanted to impress everyone. It was always like how can I show and tell more than I'm actually doing the work? It was.
So this is quite a very interesting kind of perspective she's providing, and this brings me on to the third sign that you need to quit your job, which would be corporate lies, right? If you're feeling like you're constantly you're putting a mask on your character, the corporate lies and playing along with a charade that you're not comfortable with, then it's another sign you need to quit. And I think sometimes you can say there is a fine line between being professional, having tact, being polite and patient, and dealing with different personality types in a professional way, and then completely playing a fake character that you really don't like and it's really stressing you out, right? And that's kind of the fine line. If you feel like, oh, I'm completely playing a fake character, the whole imposter syndrome thing, things like that, then it's really a sign that, maybe I shouldn't be doing this job because it feels like I'm playing a character that's just not just I'm being professional and dealing with other personality types. And then the thing is about these corporate lies, hustle culture, and I really advise everyone to think carefully about what's influencing them, not just in the workplace, but also in social media, right? And I remember to feed off this kind of hustle culture, grind culture thing, there's a influencer called Jocko Willink who talks about how he used to work in the military, and he talks about discipline. He wakes up at like 4 a.m. each day, does his workout, and he posts his watch at the time of around 4 a.m. to social media, Twitter, Instagram, things like that when he wakes up, to kind of hold himself accountable and to encourage other people to have discipline in their life. And I agree that's a very good thing in a sense, but if you're caught up with all these different influences telling you, oh, hustle, grind, work hard, things like that, and then you have all these bizarre routines and habits that just don't work for your lifestyle. For example, to pick the 4 a.m. thing, right? So if you're waking up at 4 a.m. and going for a workout, does that actually work with your life schedule in terms of when your work day starts at your corporate job? If you're going to sleep super late because you have to do work or because you have family priorities, does that schedule actually work for you? So really think carefully about not just the corporate brainwashing, which I talk about in a lot of my videos, but there is a lot of social media brainwashing too. Like what actually works for you in your personal circumstances in your life. And through my kind of career advice, coaching services and things like that, I really tried to think about each individual, because if there was a group solution, then we would have solved it, like I say, through politics, through community, things like that. These are really like individual solutions because we do have like an individualistic society. So really figure out what works for you and not what works for everyone else. Now, she mentions doing a double major, marketing and supply chain, working on logistics and procurement like Amazon, things like that, which are nothing bad to do. But that brings me on to point 4, which is a sign you might need to quit your job and pivot your career would be, why did you pick your degree? Did you pick it because you genuinely wanted to do it? You need to think carefully about those things, particularly before you do it, because you don't want to have a massive student loan and make an expensive mistake. Now, when I picked my degree, which is around economics and learning about economic history too, I found it interesting because I was interested in economics. I did have an interest in history and writing. I liked writing in particular, writing reports and things like that. And I'm making videos right now because I actually like talk radio and things like that when I was growing up, which is now like podcasts. But I also like writing a lot. So if blogging was still a popular thing and blogging isn't popular, I'd probably write quite a few blogs and things like that because that's something that interests me. So that's when I picked economics. It kind of made sense. I also had a very deep interest around that time and now too around conspiracy theories, understanding how economics really works, fractional reserve banking, central banks, them printing money out of thin air, which is creating all the inflation you see now, and the popularity of crypto like Bitcoin or even physical gold, like alternative assets having a gold-backed currency. These are all things that genuinely interest me when I pick economics. It wasn't solely like, oh, I'm going to pick a finance degree and then work a high-powered finance job, work in investment banking and things like that. It wasn't really status-driven. And that's something I'd encourage you to think carefully what you're doing, because she mentions how she was kind of heavily influenced to pick this degree because she thought, oh, it's the corporate career, that's the thing to do. What actually interests you? And through starting her side businesses, doing some freelancing and things like that, she actually came closer to finding out what she does. And she wants to do a bit more creative work, some things in marketing. And that's really important. It's like and this happens to a lot of people, so I'm not judging her. It's like people take the long way round to find out what they want to do. And the long way round could be an expensive mistake or an expensive use of time. You waste a lot of money through that student loan. You waste a lot of time. Maybe many people in their 20s, they waste it maybe doing something they don't want to do. And I know it's easier said than done. And I think the way the system works is a bit flawed, right? You can't expect someone at 18, 19, whenever they pick their college major, whenever they pick their university degree, to know what they want to do for the rest of their life. Because the system is kind of hell-bent on programming you. And that's why you have to undo the programming and figure out what your genuine interest is and be a bit stubborn with that. Because you will have many family members and other people who say, well, maybe you want to do let's just say, the economics degree that I found interesting. You might have family members that say, oh no, you should go and study law. That's more conducive to maybe your interests and also what's going to make money, study medicine, things like that. So if you really figure out what works for you, that's the best way of doing it. And that brings me on to point number 5 is think about the brainwashing, right? Because work is glamorized through the media. We see it in the past with Sex in the City and this kind of career woman, girl boss narrative that she mentioned here, that she was girl bossing too close to the sun, as in being under the illusion of the girl boss thing. And you should think about that, not just social media, not just the workplace, not just the education system, but also traditional media, TV shows, Netflix, things like that. Point number 6 is around anxiety. That's another major red flag that you might need to quit your job. Where if you're kind of constantly going to work, and she mentions kind of feeling her body temperature was all over the place. Sometimes I notice people who are stressed and they're working on a trading floor, they might be sweating more, they might just be coming across as they're a bit on edge. And I know it's easier said than done, but it's really important to pay attention to those signs. And it's easy to ignore them because, I have to make money, I have to pay my bills this month, I'm going to have to do this for a few years and then I can figure out something else. It's really important to slow down and figure out what's going on here, if this is a reoccurring pattern, or whether it's off before work. Figure out what's the dynamic here, because when you're in the moment at work, it's hard to think that through because you're just under pressure to get work done. So that's worthwhile considering too.
It's very much like visibility. If we see you in the office, you're doing well. If we don't see you in the office, you're not doing well. And I don't want to describe my team and my job to be like the worst thing on earth. Like, there was obviously parts of it that I liked, but generally it was putting on a mask every day just to fit in. It was just so normal, but it's so not me now that I think about it. And like, I don't like math, I don't like science, I don't like ass kissing. I like my 100% freedom. I like to be creative. When COVID hit and I was home alone doing all this work, there was really nothing to daydream or fantasize about. I was left with the reality of the work, which I didn't like. I hated it. I thought it was so boring. I was just on calls all day. I'm starting to fall into content and realize I like that more. And when you have something you like versus something you don't like next to each other, you start to see how much you hate the thing that you hate. And I feel like I turned into a shell of myself. I dreaded work. I hated thinking about work. When someone brought up data analytics or anything close to my job, I hated it. I wanted nothing to do with this job. And I remember I would have these 6 a.m. meetings to meet with like people in a different team around the world, and I would just be like sitting up waiting before that meeting, looking at my screen, knowing I couldn't figure out what I was supposed to present to them, and I had no idea what I was talking about. And it was just terrifying. You were expected to answer messages and to be on calls and to deliver work and be happy and have a good time, and it was not possible. So I remember I had one day where I was just like, I have to stay at this job for 1 more year to pay off my loans. That's a lot of have tos. I have to. And then I was like, okay, fine. I know you hate it. Just wait a year. Literally the next day, I came back and I was like, I can't do this for another day. And I think that was in July of 2020. By September.
So let's go through this in a bit of detail, right? So firstly, point number 7, around visibility. If you feel like you're putting on a show, masking, as I mentioned before, sucking up to people, it's really showing that you're not comfortable in what you're doing. And I realized that certain times for myself when I was working at a particular investment bank, and the managing director would make a lot of jokes that were just not funny or kind of cringe. And the co-workers slightly more senior than me at the vice president level, they would go along and fake laugh at his jokes and play along with it. And it's just like, if that's the future for me, that I have to fake laugh at managers' jokes and play along with it, it's just a bit ridiculous. And I remember that 1 or 2 occasions where the managing director was looking at me directly because I wasn't laughing at his jokes. I don't know what it is with some senior people. They think that, you have to fake laugh at their jokes, or that they're playing this kind of characters to make themselves seem less intimidating to more junior employees. They play this kind of goofy character. And I get it. They don't want to be intimidating and things like that, but it's a bit like, it's kind of unnecessary. Let's just get on with the work. And this is when it goes back to who is the real you, and digging deep to what you want, and not blurring the lines between the character you need to play and who you genuinely are. So if you're doing fake responses, you're kind of having to act and play along with productivity theatre, which is another interesting phrase. Productivity theatre is kind of where you have to pretend to be productive because you're attending all these meetings, you don't actually have time to do your actual work. Then it really does raise the question as to whether you should stay in the job or not. Now, I think it's kind of like when you're doing work, I understand it takes time and energy and effort, but is it kind of filling you up or is it draining you? And if you're constantly doing work and you're feeling completely drained, that's another sign you might need to quit your job. And consider what actually about the job is bothering you. If it's a ton of meetings, there may be a pivot you can make to a job that has less meetings. Is there a discussion you could have with your manager or other team members that you're working with to have shorter meetings so you can be more productive and get the actual work done rather than just talking about the work? And this is kind of important for you to really assess early on so you don't spend several years doing a job you don't actually enjoy. Because sometimes it's not the actual work that's bothering you, it's about a certain dynamic, a certain specific thing about it, whether it's a toxic manager or a certain approach to work and productivity. And that brings me on to like point number 8, which is the urgency to leave, right? Which she was talking about just at the end, feeling a bit uncomfortable. She feeling like she really had to quit. She couldn't go another day with the same type of job. So that's why you should always plan ahead with your finances. I know things sometimes like budgeting, saving and investing might seem boring. It might seem like you're living way below your means when you want to have more fun and you studied hard at college, at university, you're working a high power career, you want to live a extravagant life to a certain extent, and then you can't do it because you're always saving money, you're always playing it safe. But that playing it safe gives you a lot of freedom later on down the line to, I wouldn't say be reckless, but be more aggressive in your pursuit of freedom, whether that's quitting a job and spending a year outside the standard rat race to pursue your own interests or develop your side business. So it's really worthwhile thinking about that moment that could come later in your career where you're having a great time doing your job. All of a sudden, your mood changes, your approach to life changes, and you have an urgency to leave. Have you got that backup plan, that plan B, which could be investments or other plans like that?
I would say number one, first and foremost, my values did not match. My values did not match corporate, I think in general, but especially the company and the people around me. Values was something I was ironically introduced to during an HR exercise on this job. It was in March of 2020, right before COVID hit, that I really had this like weird out of body experience at like a leadership summit. Past iffy and future iffy were like at a crossroads. And it was like the first time I was realizing this. They presented, like the HR team presented an HR exercise where you write down your values and you talk about them. And I just remember everybody at the table writing down these values that just like, they were fine, there's nothing wrong with these values, but like I realized how different theirs were from mine, and I couldn't believe how different it was because everyone, I feel like, had someone else at the table who had values that were similar to theirs. Integrity, responsibility, dignity, family. They were just very like serious, not Gen Z. Even the younger people with me were like about these serious values. And if you don't know what values are, I feel like they're good constraints. That's what I like to call them. I have a podcast episode all about values and how they literally changed my life, and this was the moment. I feel like they are words that you ground yourself in and they mean something to you. And I feel like how you decide is you look at a list and choose your top 10, your top 5, your top 3. You kind of narrow down until you get to like the core ones, but I would say top 3 to 5 are like really key in your life. And how you know something is a value is that's usually what comes up when you make decisions. My values were freedom. Number 1 was freedom, creativity, fun. I think I have achievement, but it's like on my latter end. Individuality, authenticity, those are so key to me. I had my values and I was listening to everyone's, and funny enough, I was the last person to go. And I was reading my values off and I just felt so out of place. That's so weird that like I'm the only one who has any of these words on their list. And I'm sitting with executives, like these are the people I'm going to be one day if I pursue this corporate dream. And it was kind of during that retreat that I realized that I don't want to be any of them, like not individually as people, but like I don't envy this lifestyle. I don't envy like this job or what they're doing. My values were not aligned with the people around me who were supposed to be my like role models. And I think funny enough, like jealousy, envy has a bad.
So she's got quite an interesting perspective here that we need to kind of consider a bit of detail. Firstly is around corporate values. Now, companies really ram down their values down your throat. You might have to attest to them annually that you agree with their values or that you support the values. When you do your end of year performance review, you have to justify how activity you're doing is aligned with the corporate values. But end of the day, this is your life, so you should figure out your values. Now, what could that be? I've came up with different acronyms in the past, like HWF, health, wealth, and freedom. Another one could be strong, rich, and righteous. There's different ideas out there, and that's why I think about how when you're at work, you have a notepad where you note down everything with your day job, right? Everyone has some sort of notepad along with their work PC and their work laptop. But you should also have notepads and journals yourself, sketch pads, things like that. So all the interesting ideas you come up with, you make a note of it, whether it's in your phone or preferably, like I say, notepad or sketch pad, to kind of sketch out your ideas for your life, draw little diagrams of what your priorities are, where you want to be in your life, like a flow chart of where you're heading. These are all interesting things to do for yourself. You don't have to discuss it with others, but figure out your core values. You mentioned freedom and creativity and fun and things like that. But if you don't figure that out, it's the same way people complain about working a day job and they're building someone else's dream. They need to build their own dream by doing their own thing and quitting and things like that. But it's the same thing with values. What are your values day to day? Because if you just kind of follow the standard 9 to 5 corporate life, you kind of end up just, okay, maybe waking up just in time so you can get ready to go to work, drinking a coffee, watching the same reality TV shows people watch out after work, going out for work drinks, just being like a normal generic cog in a machine type of person. There's no individuality there. And the reason is because you're not glorifying your own values. So you need to figure out what that is, right? Because I genuinely believe that the work you do, which takes up most of your time for most people, is meant to be on some level more deeper in terms of how fulfilling it is, or somewhat spiritual. And I know that might sound a bit over the top, but if you're just doing a job like a brain dead job, whatever it is, stacking shelves in a grocery store, working a corporate job, working in a manual labor, and you're kind of not finding like it has a deeper meaning to you, it will make you unhappy over time. So that's why it's important to know what your values are and glorify those values. Like I say, if it's building incredible amounts of wealth, then you might not mind working a job that's slightly boring because you're investing aggressively so you can maybe buy more property to live a better quality of life in another country, things like that. And then this kind of disconnects with the executives. One thing, and this brings me on to point number 9, that you might need to quit your job, is that if you have a disconnect with the more senior team members, because if you continue in the same path, this corporate path, in the particular niche you're in her case, like working around supply chains for major companies, you're going to become one of those executives one day. You're going to become whatever personality type they are. And if you don't like them, or you think they're cringe, or you're like, I really wouldn't want to be that personality type, or have that many restraints in my life and how I conduct myself, or over time the influence of the company will make me into someone like that, then you should think about your career path. Because over time, that pressure of $1 billion corporation you might be working on will inevitably change your personality type. So if you don't like those type of people, then think about what you want to do. It's the same thing with having official career mentors, and that's why I provide like genuine career advice that isn't obfuscated or kind of diluted by the company you're working for. Because typically when you work for a company, they give you a career mentor, and there's just people who sometimes they could be nice, but sometimes it's people you don't actually want to be or respect, and you're like, how can I take advice from someone who's 5-10 years more older than me and not actually in a position I want to be in? So that's something you got to take into account too. If there's a disconnect with the senior team members and you don't want to be someone like that, then maybe you should figure out your own thing. And yeah, like I say, that's a major red flag. I've had instances like that where, to give it one example, where I don't have kids, but at that time I was thinking, if I did have kids in the future, how would I deal with this? There was a senior team member working on the trading floor. He was effectively at managing director level, even though he had a slightly different job title. And he was like second in command at the top of our team, kind of respected, but he didn't really have any free time. And his kids were in private school. He was paying a lot of money for them to go to one of the best schools in the country. He didn't have time for maybe his wife, for his kids. And his kids inevitably grew up around influences that he wouldn't really be necessarily supportive of or understand or agree with. And this is what you see a lot of the time. These people might have high-powered jobs. They just don't have much time out of it, and all their identity is their work identity. Yes, they might be having a lot of social status, having a high pay, but their job literally is their life, right? They're literally there 12 hours a day, and they don't mind it. They don't mind having a suit on all day, going for dinner in the evening with their co-workers, things like that. So you really need to think about it. When you pick a career, you do pick a lifestyle. Is it a right fit for you or not? That's worthwhile assessing early on in your career rather than when it's too late.
Right. But you always have a point where you outgrow what you've learned either, or where you just say, I don't think this is something I care to grow into. You know what I mean? For the first year, I kept telling myself, I'm like, you're just new at this. This is why you're not grasping it. This is why you're not getting it. I felt imposter syndrome like crazy. I could never grasp the concepts. I could never grasp the languages that I was learning or the softwares that we were using. It just wasn't easy and natural for me. And like, not that it should be like a piece of cake, but it was far from a piece of cake. Like, it was a little too hard for me to understand. Like, Raheen would have to do some of my work for me and like help me with it. He does AI, machine learning, so he really understands this stuff. And I would just be like, I don't get this, and rightfully so. This is so not me. I've never been that person. I think my mistake was thinking I could just kind of like work past that. I feel like in business school, there's very much this mentality, finance bro mentality, like you can do anything. And I think I can do anything, but should you do everything? I think that was the question I should have asked myself. I think because everyone was like, this is a good job, it's good pay, like you just get yeses from everybody that you don't even realize it doesn't align with you. RFP RFPs or proposals, if you know anything about that world, it's basically like long contracts, negotiating, saving money. And these are all things that I couldn't give a rat's ass about. And I felt like I was like forcing myself to be interested because I wanted to look good and do a good job. Number 3.
So let's go through this in a bit of detail. Now, firstly, she was mentioning just towards the end around reading contracts and that being a bit boring for her. Now, I remember people who worked in legal at some of these top banks, they were quite avid readers. And if you're someone early on in life, you don't enjoy reading and you find it quite boring, you didn't enjoy the reading tasks you might have to do at college or university, that's probably a sign maybe that's not your personality type, and maybe you're more of a people person, you're more of an extrovert than an introvert, and then sales roles could be better for you, for example. So it's worthwhile thinking, like, what is your natural interests, your natural tendency to master certain skills? And if it's, as I say, being more of a people person than a technical person, then make sure your career heads in that trajectory, because even if you might not see a lot of opportunities there for you initially, if that's naturally attuned to who you are, that's where you're going to succeed over the long term rather than become unhappy over the long term. So that kind of brings me on to that point number 10, which she's talking about here, where you outgrow or you lose interest in a particular job, you have some level of imposter syndrome, and it's not natural to you. So that's what you got to think about. What is the right fit for you? And that can change over time, right? Like I say, it may be easier said than done, where a certain portion of your life you might like doing that kind of technical reading work, and then over time you develop more sales skills. And always try to lean into naturally what your best fit is, rather than just simply what would be the next logical step in your career, because that's not always the best option for you. Many people just fall into the normie NPC hamster wheel lifestyle, and they go from one promotion to the next. You might develop another interest area, and you might be the first mover there, the first mover advantage, and then all of a sudden you've got a market lead because you developed a specific niche interest. The obvious example would be, people moving from traditional finance to fintech, working at some of these challenger banks, working in crypto, things like that. So the thing is, and that can be a bit more difficult, because when you're doing something maybe more creative or outside the traditional path, it might feel a bit unstable, particularly at the start, right? So you're like, okay, I'm moving to this growing area. It might be a big hype, and then it dies down over the next few years. But it's kind of like, what do you see as your natural future in terms of your natural skill set and moving in that direction? I know it's easier said than done. I know it's higher risk, but if you've only got one life to live, in a sense, it's worthwhile considering what that would be. And you don't have to make super risky decisions, but try to take small steps in a direction that's actually better fitting for your personality type. That's the best approach to take.
I was talking more than I was doing. And I feel like if this is not a sign, I don't know what is. Like, you feel like the only time you're working on something is when you're talking about it. Maybe there's some disconnect between what you're doing and your actual passion or interest or curiosity or skill level. One, corporate structure never gives you the time to get any work done. We were always in meetings. It was so annoying. But I felt like even if I was getting work done, and even if I did accomplish projects, I wasn't proud of it. I would get promoted, or I would get pats on the back, and people would tell me like, that's really good, or you handled that really well. And I didn't feel it. Like, I did.
So this is quite interesting too, in terms of point 11 of why you might need to quit your job. And the thing is, when you're doing your work, and if you understand the corporate game, you might have to spend so much time in meetings, because a lot of it does become about visibility. So if it's all about talking about being busy, you have barely any time for doing the work. There's tons of pointless meetings. You're not happy playing the corporate game, sucking up to management, being obsessed with where you are in the corporate structure and how you make it to the next level. Then you should really think that carefully through. Like I say, you could discuss that with your manager in terms of managing your workload, having less meetings, being more efficient with that. But if you don't kind of understand the dynamic is all about being seen. And that's why the actual work, the actual productivity often gets left to the end of the day or gets delayed because of all these meetings. And I've been in many instances like that. We have many hours of meetings throughout the day. You can barely focus on one piece of work, because you have maybe one meeting, then you can focus on work for 45 minutes to an hour, then you have another meeting, and it kind of becomes like that. You have barely any long-term productive time, like 3 to 4 hours of just being able to focus. I've been in situations like that, and it's just chaotic. And you realize with a lot of these corporations, they're way more disorganized than they want to portray. And that's because it does become a lot about perception rather than productivity. So you have all this work left to the end of the day, and then you have to spend a late evening getting the work done in a kind of peaceful setting. And that's something, again, it depends on your personality type. My personality type is that I like to have extended periods where I can be focused and do deep work or be in flow state. And many people, I'm sure you can relate to that, maybe from the tech industry and you like coding. You want these long periods of time where you're just focusing, maybe you have music in the background, you take little mini breaks, but you're really focused on a piece of work. Sometimes it can be difficult to do that in some of these corporate jobs. So just bear in mind, as I say, like what naturally works for you. And then point number 12 is just kind of feeling numb. If you're feeling numb to the approval and validation of others, it feels like it's not you really doing the work, there is a level of imposter syndrome, and you don't feel ownership over the work. And I think the whole concept of having ownership over your work, the obvious case would be running your own business, doing your own thing, but most work in some sense is collaborative, right? Even if you have your own business, you might have your own clients. If you're working for a company, they do have obviously ownership of your time in a sense, and the inevitable stake in the project when it reaches conclusion, of the profitability of that particular project. But there is an element of ownership you should feel of what you do, so you can take pride in what you do daily. And if you feel like it's so detached from what you are and who you are, then again, that's a red flag that maybe you should be looking elsewhere in terms of the next step of your career and your income sources.
To tell you how many Sunday scaries I had. I didn't know what I was doing for the life of me. I just remember feeling so stupid. I couldn't ever explain anything I was talking about, and I luckily have the skill of like communicating and speaking, so I think I could like BS my way out of it. I basically BS myself into this job. I would be paralyzed. Like I would be up late thinking, contemplating like, should I stay up for 3 more hours and get nothing done, or should I go to sleep and feel guilty and then wake up and be fried before the meeting and have nothing done? It was this constant loop of feeling like I don't have anything done, I didn't finish this, I never got to this, I don't know what I'm doing. I remember like when we had interns, I'd be like, can you help me? I didn't even know how to teach them. It was bad. And my anxiety in my body, like I'm not even an anxious person, but the anxiety in my body was just, I feel like on overdrive with that job. And I think I noticed this in my skin, in my hair, in my face. I just noticed how tired I looked, like the bags under my eyes. I also didn't have any like good routines at the time. I was just like in bed. I would wake up, pull out my laptop, all in the dark, by the way, start working, go to sleep really late, doom scroll because I'm so depressed about this job. The moment I got to close my laptop, I was like, let's go. I would go get treats every day to make myself feel better, get boba, get ice cream, get fast food. It was just like this toxic, vicious cycle.
So that's point number 13 of why you should quit your job, right? If you do have Sunday scaries is where you have a lot of anxiety for your work week. And I've had that in the past. I know other people who have, where you're just dreading Monday, and sometimes people call in sick on Monday. But if you're really anxious about the work week every week, it's really a sign that maybe this job isn't for you, or this particular career path. And if you're constantly worried, dealing with anxiety, working in the middle of the night, kind of having to, create all these unhealthy lifestyle choices just to be able to sustain yourself and get through the work day, then that really is another sign that there's too much worry and anxiety that you're trying to cover up through unhealthy habits. And the thing is like, if you want to survive in the corporate environment, you have to understand that a lot of it is about putting on the mask, playing this kind of pointless small talk, and it's not really necessarily based on having real skills. It mostly is office politics rather than doing the actual work. So that's something, particularly in like a supply chain type of role. This isn't like a technical role, so you have to kind of understand what the reality is day to day. And if you're early on in your career, and you're maybe studying, you're at college or university now, or kind of maybe in your early 20s, really try to think through what is the reality of the job, right, that you're going for. You might have an interest in coding, but what is it like coding on a day-to-day basis? What it's like being part of a sprint or dealing with a project and the time pressures you might be under, or maybe the more tedious elements of the job. The same thing when it comes to supply chain, which she studied her degree for. Was she aware of what the day-to-day work was? And I don't mean just the kind of corporate fluff that gets fed to you when you are at university or college. Oh, this is going to be a high paying job, you do these super interesting projects, you're managing these global supply chains. What does it actually look like on a day-to-day basis? And many people don't know that, and that's why they end up in these situations where it's a bit like, yikes, I'm kind of caught up in a career that wasn't what I thought it would be. Really try to get down to the reality of what it is, and that's why, like my channel, I try to provide you with this kind of honest assessment of the reality of work.
This one was the biggest one. I was living to escape. I'm kind of just learning what escapism is. This was peak escapism. I was constantly looking for the next vacation. I was constantly looking for the next event, hanging out with my friends. I wanted to do so many things that I feel like it was bleeding into my relationship. I remember getting mad at Shaheen. Why don't you take me on these dates? Like, I wanted to go to these crazy excursions and like, not just like a normal date. Like, I wanted him to take me ice skating on the moon because I felt so drained and bored in my day-to-day that I needed the vacations, I needed the date nights, I needed like the hangouts with friends to be that much more. It's not like I could afford anything that crazy, but I did have access to money now, which I had never made this much money in my life. So I was just like, I want to go on this vacation, Bali, I want to go around the world. And you know, these things were fun. They were a great time, don't get me wrong. But I just felt like I needed to overcompensate, like bigger the better. It's funny because when I had all these things, I had massage appointments, I was getting my nails done, I was getting my hair done, I was going on vacations, I was eating out and going to happy hours and hanging out with friends all the time and planning the next trip, which are parts of my personality. I feel like it was coming from a toxic void rather than from my natural, abundant, happy mindset. The more I did those things, the more I was just like, oh, see, I need this job because if I don't have this job, I can't pay for all of these crazy things. Like my crazy fun lifestyle 3 years in the future, I don't think I needed half of the amount of things that I had. Genuinely, I just wasn't fulfilled with what I was doing 9 to 5. So I was like overcompensating with everything else, with shopping. Oh my God, don't even get me started with shopping. I don't need all of those things to make me happy, and you don't need.
So again, another key important point that she's making here, right? Where unhealthy coping mechanisms do develop, and that's point number 14, fast food, wasting time, Netflix, staying up late, escaping expensive travel excursions and days out. These are all to cover up hating your daily life. And there's many examples of this. Maybe female co-workers buying expensive handbags and shoes, maybe men drinking too much, things like that. This system is a machine that has a deliberate plan to exploit you and exploit your time and energy and your money. And you don't realize this because at the time you're thinking, I'm working, what am I meant to do? I'm meant to spend money and have fun. But like I say, it's a deliberate plan to exploit you. So you've got to take a step back and think about what you want. And there is a link here between being unhappy in your job and that putting pressure on your personal lives, where in her case, or in the case of some women who might not be happy with their career, and they put that pressure on their boyfriend or the husband to keep them happy, or happy wife, happy life, or keeping their girlfriend happy in a sense. And that's what leads to all these expensive trips. And I think many men can kind of see through the lies now. You see with the red pill content, things like that out there, where maybe a woman's not happy with their career or their kind of lifestyle around her career, and then a man has to go to the extent of keeping her happy, which results in expensive dates and things like that. And you've got to think about all the toxic voids that are covering up the fact, say you're not happy with your career, and the reality for most people, whether they want to realize it or not, is that most people prefer a slower paced life, even though it's fed this hustle culture type of thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with being productive, pursuing your goals, but life is not meant to be moving at this 100 miles an hour pace that you're being encouraged to do, not only through corporate life, but also in people's social life. People, if you really think about how did people live for like thousands of years, it was a slightly slower paced life. Even though they'd have goals, they would make money. Most of the fulfillment in life is kind of taking life day by day and just enjoying it in this slower moments, maybe with family or friends, things like that. That's really what the joy of life is. And it goes back to work that should be fulfilling, and it shouldn't be feeling like you're racing through each day to reach the next goal. If you're living your life like that, you really got to ask yourself why. And I think it's good to be passionate and driven and ambitious to achieve your goals, whether that's through entrepreneurship, through your work life. But if it's really like you're racing through each day, then you've got to really take a moment to pause and say why. And that's a very difficult moment to realize. And that's when people do have like I say, mental health issues, and they're dealing with anxious, depressed kind of states because they have to make a massive pivot. What they thought they would work for them, which could be their career, in her instance, in other cases I've seen, they have to really think, maybe actually what makes me fulfilled is maybe doing something slightly different, maybe with a more unstable income, but at least I have that peace of mind that I really need daily, which is my priority, not being an overconsumer.
me was just this deeper inner voice, so known as our intuition, and it's not super clear. You do have to get rid of the noise to listen to it. But this voice has honestly been around since I was young, like kind of begging and pleading for me to do something with my life and telling me that you're meant to be someone, you're meant to give, and you're meant to talk, and you're meant to, be somebody. Not only was I ignoring that, I think I was just ignoring the sign that I just was not fit for this environment anymore. And it was so hard to leave because I was thinking about, what if I don't have the money? What if I don't make it? I'm on my own. I can only afford 3 more months to live.
So this kind of goes back to her point, which is my 15th and final point of why you might need to quit your job, is that you need to try to fill your intuition rather than society's path. You don't have to make reckless finance decisions, but you have to realize to a certain extent you can't worry about it too much. You just take one step closer to your dream life and not regretting, whether you could fail and things like that, just kind of trying to take a step in the right direction each day. And different approaches, depending on your personal circumstances. It could be taking a slower, easier job with less work hours, so you have more free time to develop your own skill set that would work more for you if you're making a pivot in your career from one industry to the other. All these type of things, you have to be more comfortable and more eager to take risks, right? Don't be so risk averse. You have to embrace risk. And you see many times people, not just with investments, not just with maybe pursuing their own thing, pivoting through their career. Life is not meant to be this safe option. And if you opt for the safe option of just continuing down a path that isn't necessarily working for you, you will be unhappy over the long term, even though you've got the safe option. That's why you have to understand, life for anyone involves a certain level of risk. And it's like, the more risks you're willing to take, calculated risks, the more payoff that you can receive. Even if you have a failure, you can kind of pivot to taking another decision. Don't feel like you're going to mess up your life because, you've taken a year out of your traditional career to pursue something else, right? And that year of risk was probably worth it, so you're not questioning it all the time of whether it could work out for you or not. There's all types of instances like this for you to kind of consider. And that's why someone like me, who's worked in the finance industry for over 10 years, I do offer career advice to talk you through some of these life-changing decisions. Link in description if you want to speak with me directly. Let me know in the comments what were some of the signs in your life that you needed to quit your job ASAP. And let me know what you think about this video. 2 recommended videos on the screen right now, and I'll see you next time.